So this one talks about the importance of affirmative action and diversity training and lessons from a behavioral study on the Indian caste system, which I know we've talked about before. The Indian caste system, we see a lot of applications of that in societies all over the world, not just in India, this caste system of hierarchy. So some of the questions that were asked were, what are some personality and psychological differences between students belonging to the lower versus upper castes in India, specifically in terms of competitiveness, confidence, risk attitudes, the big five personality traits, locus of control, and grit. And the methodology that was used was that researchers conducted incentivized experiments among some 2,000 college students, which were enrolled in various undergraduate programs across the 15 colleges in Delhi University in the year 2014, so fairly recently. And these experiments were followed by a short socioeconomic survey that captured the students' demographic characteristics and socio-emotional traits. And this short survey is important because it can sort of capture the potential reasons for variances among these different caste systems. So that's important. And the results found that the lower caste systems are 8.7% and 7.9% less likely to be competitive in comparison to those belonging to upper castes. And upper caste subjects score themselves higher on scales of extroversion, agreeableness, and openness to experience and grit. Both the upper caste and OBC students scored similarly on conscientiousness, but also scored higher than students in the SCTSTs. The upper caste subjects had a significant advantage in cognitive ability as measured by the Ravens test, and the applications of this are that workplaces need to nudge their more privileged employees into building more inclusive environments. And it also highlights the importance of affirmative action and making sure that people who are in lower caste systems or are kind of at the bottom of the totem pole in terms of societies are able to utilize different programs that governments and administrations have to still kind of level the playing field out. And I'm gonna open up my link to the research to get a little bit more information about these different terms, OBCs, for example. But I really like how this study sort of talks about how groups from lower castes score themselves lower in terms of being competitive. I think that's a really interesting kind of insight into how people who are at the bottom of the totem pole or are considered less privileged tend to kind of view themselves as that and don't really think that they have as much of an edge as people who are higher up do, which I think is why it's so important that we have these programs that allow for people who are at the bottom to kind of level themselves up. And we talk about the difference between equity and equality, and I think this conversation definitely has some applications there. So I'll do some more digging on these terms, but I'd like to hear you guys talk about the study.
Yeah, I thought this one was very interesting, and the terms specifically, I looked them up too, because when I was reading this, I was like, I don't know what any of these. I'm not familiar with the Indian caste system, so the biggest thing that I took away from looking at them is the scheduled caste, tribes, and other backward castes. Just knowing that they're the lower, like you said, lower on the totem pole. There's a lot of history behind them that they go into in the study, but for this study's purposes, it's just knowing that they're on the lower end in terms of societal value. So but yeah, I thought it was very interesting. I liked how it was connected to the diversity training and affirmative action pieces, and I think there's a lot of takeaways that we could take away for the U.S. culture too. I mean, there's a book out there called Caste that kind of argues that America has its a caste system of its own based on white supremacy and privilege and all of that. So I think it's very applicable.
Yeah, I'm doing some more research on the study, and it talks about, it just kind of highlights the importance of diversity training and talks about how people who are privileged are more likely to have gone to private schools, therefore they're more likely to be confident and feel like they're competitive amongst their peers, whereas students who are less privileged might have gone to public schools, might not have gotten special treatment, might have had larger classes, and so maybe didn't have as much one-on-one time with the teacher who was able to boost their confidence. So to your point, Noah, I think there are a lot of applications for this, not just in India, but in the United States, and definitely in what we're seeing in conflicts today.
Absolutely. I like how this study sort of validates the stereotypes that already exist. I'm applying this to the US context as far as upper caste, kind of, Alyssa, as you were just saying, like seeing highlighting their grit and their agreeableness, their openness, as though they're, when in reality, that's not, a lot of us see that differently, right? And so these diversity trainings, I like this kind of key takeaway that we really need to kind of nudge the more privileged employees to creating more inclusive workplace environments, because they might not even have the awareness that they're not in an inclusive work environment, right?
I completely agree, Sarah. And I actually find it really interesting that they didn't talk about imposter syndrome in this, because I'm sure we all know what that is. And definitely I've noticed that it impacts women more so than men, and people of color more so than white people. At least in my, this is not like, I'm not getting this from a study, this is just from talking to my peers. So, you know, but I find it interesting. I feel like imposter syndrome has a lot to do with building your confidence and imagining how competitive you are. And I definitely see some applications, to your point, Sarah, of kind of nudging more privileged employees to build a more inclusive environment. I think if you're someone who is higher up on the totem pole, recognizing your position and trying to help your coworkers, your peers, your friends, whatnot, to recognize that they do have something to bring to the table, I think can mitigate the effects of imposter syndrome, which I think affects more people than we realize, especially in the workplace.
On the confidence factors in the study too, I didn't list it here, but it's, you know, they said that the two of the scheduled castes and the scheduled tribes, which are two of the lower castes, were 7.2% points less likely to be confident too. So confidence plays a role here as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's an important point, because if you're looking at like any kind of some sort of training to make things more equitable, we need to look at it from both sides, because I think like you can see this is like when you grow up and you internalize the story that somehow you're the lower caste or you're the lower class, and you have this story running throughout society and you're getting these messages. This is self-report. This is like, I am not as confident as as you should be, or you don't have that, because of all the messages you've received. So there's a level of like, how do we also train that side to be more confident, to have more of that, that while the other side's becoming more aware, it's not going to help that much if the other side doesn't become more confident and have, maybe more competitive, more like rate themselves on higher extroversion or whatever each society values as some sort of, positive traits. Really. But yeah, it looks like, to me, it's like a two-pronged approach. How do we get both to level out?
As it so happens, I just dropped you all an article from Stanford. I used it recently in a training that was all about pushing mentorship for more advantaged people, them pushing mentorship as a way to help disadvantaged groups, I'm going to say. And specifically talked about that concept. Is it the Johari window? I think it's like, we don't know what we don't know kind of idea. People from disadvantaged groups don't know what they don't know. And so they don't have any idea what it means to be competent. But the long story short, this article, which is based on North America, I'll read it to you. Individuals with relatively high social class tend to be more overconfident because they have a stronger desire to achieve high social rank, like you said, Jeremy, relative to our culture. And then replicated these findings that a high-powered, blah, 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 blah. Individuals with relatively high social class were more overconfident, even in a task in which they had no performance advantages. So the spirit of this definitely carries over to North America, for sure.
Yeah.
It's interesting, these like associations we make with, privilege versus underprivileged, and the like psychological components that are associated with both. I mean, that's biased, but it's interesting to kind of see it.
There's this confidence variable is very, overconfidence is like a widely studied, phenomenon, and looking at the correlation between overconfidence and certain like advantaged groups, and then looking at underconfidence, because it seems like also there's underconfidence that needs to be sort of raised up to working levels, and like so confidence levels has to correlate in some way with the idea of even advantage of like how do we equalize things without everyone feeling a similar level of confidence. If one group, for instance, is going to be totally underconfident, the others become overconfident, how do we get them to equal out? Because essentially there's no reason to be underconfident except for what society is telling or the culture is telling them about themselves.
And yeah, I mean, those are our biases, right? The associations that we're making. So I'm now going down a rabbit hole thinking about like how, so what do we do with that, right? How do we break those associations? Is it through, you know, these affirmative action government programs or diversity trains? You know, I mean, you can look at both of those, but then there's also this wellness aspect and consciousness and confidence, right? But how best to bring those to kind of both sides, right? To like boost confidence on those the associations of the underprivileged or the lower status, and then kind of tame the confidence of those that are in higher social status and privilege.
Yeah. Like it seems like it's basically like, how do we get everybody to start thinking more realistically? The ones that are overconfident, like, hey, you're not performing as well as you think you are. Let's get you down to more realistic, like, self-assessments here. And then the other ones, you can perform way better than you think you can. Let's get you to more realistic self-assessment. And I think that has to result in sort of more equal outcomes if people feel more equal about themselves as a human being, you know?
Yeah, I think you just had the answer there. It's like the self-assessments, and I mean the 360 reviews, right? So you assess yourself, but then you also look at the assessment that others make of you, and maybe that's the answer for kind of finding the balance on all sides.
So that'd be an interesting study, actually, to look at like doing 360s and seeing if there's any correlation between the difference between how much someone overrates themselves versus how other people rate them, and then correlating that somehow with different social groups. Like, this social group most people think like they're way better than their peers actually think they are, or something like that.
Yeah, it sounds like that's similar. Well, maybe not the method of the study, but Terrell, to this study that you shared with us. I mean, it's kind of doing that same thing, but maybe I don't know the methods of it. Interesting.
So I think the bottom line is we need to help everyone start thinking more realistically about themselves. And everyone should, and maybe the goal is love yourself, have confidence in yourself, you know, you deserve it. Everyone, you know.
But also be humble.
But be humble, right? Not arrogant. Yeah, exactly. Confidence, but not arrogance.
Jeremy, could you restate one more time that high level design you were talking about? You said you'd like to see.
Oh, yeah. Like, so, you know, so for these 360 assessments where one, like a leader, for instance, he rates himself on like a few different variables. I think I communicate well, et cetera, et cetera. Then you have like 10 other people that work with him also rate how that individual does. And then you compare those ratings with his own self-rating and see the gaps. Where does he think he's not as good as the other people think he is? Where does he think he's better than those other people think he is? And you see those gaps. And I just wonder, if you did that across several different leaders, if you could categorize them into social groups, would certain social groups based on, you know, gender or race or ethnicity or whatever, would certain groups, like on average, have wider gaps between self-assessment and others' assessments of them?
Okay, so it's I'm going to say something like identity versus reputation across work, represented or underrepresented groups in the workplace, kind of something like that.
Yeah, what's like the interaction between identity, like social identity, and
Okay.
And I would say like something like leadership assessment discrepancy
All
or
right.
something,
That's enough to get me started on a basic, because I have a few assessments in mind that could give us, if we did a compare and contrast,
Yeah,
that could be easy and fast.
that's cool. Yeah, that's actually a really interesting study.
Yeah, I mean, we could take the 360 reviews that we're doing now with coaching and just add the component of some questions regarding to kind of find their social status.
Yeah. Yeah, we need a lot though. We need like probably like 100 at least samples.
Yeah, in a few years.
Yeah. We should do that. That'd be interesting. We should collect demographics if we want. I mean, I don't know if we want.
So I'll just tell you what I'm thinking of. So I finished my Hogan training recently, which is exactly a measurement between personal, my identity versus the reputation everybody else has. So it's very similar to what we're looking for. They're really expensive, but the thing is, if we're willing to give coaching for free based on the data we find, I think that we could probably easily get 100 people to participate in it, or get a company to sponsor it if they know that we're going to give them free coaching as that's the way we would pay them, is to give them free coaching based on the data we find. We can talk more about it, but I think we can do it pretty cheaply, like relatively pretty cheaply.
I wonder if there's data that exists somewhere. That there's actually 360 data that exists somewhere. Maybe not. I mean, that might be hard to come by, but
it's the match between that and your social identity, with your
right
class.
If there was like a database of 360 assessments somewhere that we could find, I'm sure they would actually have collected demographics. But again, that's a big if. Who knows if anyone's done that? But yeah, that's a cool study.
Project.
Yeah.